Hello everyone and welcome back to another episode of Teach, Sleep, Repeat. This is episode 21 and my name is Dylan.
And my name's Hayden.
And you've seen already from the thumbnail and the title that we have another guest and we're super excited. We recorded the interview a couple of weeks ago, Hayden, actually. It was quite a while ago now. But you know, busy schedules. We need to talk about different things and we thought we'd save it for you because it's super, super awesome. But before we dive in, we've got a little bit of bookkeeping to do, Hayden. We've got to do a little intros.
It's nice, isn't it?
How have you been, mate? How have you been, pal? You all right?
I've been all right. Thank you. Yeah. Funny thing happened today that I've been dying to tell you.
Okay.
So I was really random, by the way. This has never happened to me.
Right.
On the way to a hospital appointment in Medway. So, you know, a good hour's drive on the motorway, going 70 miles an hour, right? Girlfriend next to me, trying to tell me a story. And then, bam! Made us both jump. Thought we'd like hit something. A pigeon.
Oh my God.
Pigeon just literally just exploded on our car. just like bam, flew into it.
On the windscreen?
No, kind of like on the side of the car, like literally like the bit between the two sort of side doors. I couldn't believe it. So that was just hilarious, but also terrible.
Okay,
We felt really bad.
I'm going to stop you there because we're going to have to start a new segment, aren't we? Hayden's bird stories. What's going on with your bird stories? Every week there's a new bird story.
They were living in my roof, and now they're getting smacked by my car. So
and we witnessed a seagull devour dinner.
Yeah, that's true. The seagulls as well. Oh my God! And literally earlier today, you saw me. I was shooing pigeons out of my window because they're all nesting inside my roof again. So I think the pigeons have learned a lesson. Maybe they'll leave me alone now.
You're like a really rubbish Dr. Dolittle. You can only do it to birds and they just wind you up. There's nothing good coming out.
So I just had to tell you that because that was really random and bizarre and not that exciting, but just that never happens. That was crazy. But I do have one other thing because I really just want to, before I ask you how your week was, which I will, of course, because I care.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
I just want to ask the viewers for something because I've been forgetting to do this for so long. Okay.
That's not like us to ask the viewers to do something for us.
Yeah, I know. We never do this, guys. We never ask things of you. So just do this one thing. Basically, when we started making this podcast, we got ourselves set up on Apple and Spotify and all that. Now, most of you guys listen on Spotify or watch us on Spotify, but we do have some Apple podcast listeners as well. But the problem is, and it was weird timing with this, Dylan. And I wonder if you can.
I know. I know what you're going to say already.
So, funnily enough, when we released episode, whatever it was, like 3 or so, I can't remember.
Episode 5,
which was about toxicity in schools. Weirdly enough, a day or two later, we got a 1-star review, and it was our first review on Apple. We were obviously bummed out because it was our literal first review on Apple. And it stayed pretty low for a while as a couple of, 5-star, real, genuine ones, because obviously we couldn't possibly get a 1-star review for real, came in. But I just wanted to pester you guys. Can you help us out by like flooding us with some 5 stars on Apple? Because at the moment our average is being brought down by this 1 star, which, like we said, no idea who that might have been.
Who could it be?
I don't know. Idea. After episode 5, toxicity in schools, not any disgruntled SLT members, do you reckon?
No, of course not.
No,
they wouldn't. They definitely didn't listen to what we said and get angry at the fact that they think all staff shouldn't have chairs. They think staff should have chairs. They would never do that. They would take chairs away.
No. How else are we supposed to get rid of staff? Everyone's so protected. We have to bully them out. No one's doing that. No one's getting annoyed at us, like, jumping in on schools for being horrible. No one's doing that. But it was just random. Obviously, someone just thought we were 1 star after that episode about toxicity.
Poor production value or something like that, obviously.
Yeah. So help us out, guys. That'd be much appreciated. Anyway, Dylan, you've had an interesting morning. Now, I want more details because all I got from Dylan, by the way, today was a picture of his mangled foot. Not really much context, to be honest with you, because you were busy, I was busy. So
we're past the point now, okay, where we send each other messages that involve words. It's just pictures. We're at that point. So it's strike day today, for everyone who doesn't know. Strike day for teachers turns into a day of just admin, where you go to the doctors or do adult things that you just can't do otherwise. Anyway, I was relaxing. I was actually managed to relax. Got the house in order. I sat down watching something on the telly. And I jumped up because the washing machine was finished. I was like, I'll go and sort that out. Being productive, this is obviously my karma for trying to be productive. And I whacked my foot against the coffee table so hard. But it's really weird. I don't know if anyone's ever done this before, when you're obviously in extreme pain, but your body just kind of shuts it out. It's like, no, you don't have to worry about that toe dangling off your foot. Don't worry about that. The brain just like shuts it off. So I didn't actually realize that I was in excruciating pain until I'd walked to the kitchen. And I was like, oh, that does hurt a bit. I looked down, just my 3/4 of my toenail hanging off, and my and blood pouring out of my toenail. I was like, oh.
Are we at the stage yet where we can post on our Instagram pictures of our mangled toes, or are we just not quite there yet?
I don't think
We're
so.
not there yet.
Hey,
no,
you got to think of the algorithm, mate. The algorithm will not eat that up.
At least 10 more episodes before we can do that.
Yeah, but obviously when you do something like that, your adrenaline kicks in, so you don't really feel pain for like 15 minutes. Like I looked at it and I thought that should hurt way more than what it is. When I look at it, I was like, that doesn't look good. And 15 minutes later, just this dull pain comes in. I was like, oh, my foot really hurts. I was meant to go to the pub. I was meant to nip out this afternoon and enjoy my strike day, but no, I couldn't drive, can't put shoes on, so I'm barefoot.
Do you know what really made me chuckle? Is I'd forgotten. I knew that you said you were doing something later on, right? Because we're recording this podcast right now in a time that we weren't actually going to be doing it because Dylan was going out. And I've forgotten what you were doing, but the idea that because you'd stubbed your toe, you now couldn't leave the house really made me laugh.
I know. And it was just as pathetic when I was like to basically saying I couldn't come out anymore. I was like, I've hurt my little toe. It's really sore. But there was this one other thing this week, and I want to say to the listeners right now, because Hayden, you call them viewers, and I still respect those listeners, okay? And I've got nothing against the viewers. I've never said a bad word about the viewers. I never would. But there are those people out there who are listeners as well. But anyway, however you're listening or consuming this, or whatever you want to say,
or rating us 1 star, however you're doing that.
However you're doing that, we're definitely not really, really, really angry at that, and we're definitely not the kind of people to take that to heart and let it affect our mood for weeks on end. What? I don't know what you do. What do you mean? I've lost my train of thought now. Anyway, this is going to be a really long episode because the chat we had with Emily was amazing. Again, lots of people probably scrubbed right past this, aren't even listening to this bit, going straight to the bit about Emily. But we're looking forward to it. It's long, but there's one other thing I wanted to talk about, and it was this week, and it was one of those moments where I was crying with laughter in my classroom. The children were laughing their heads off. And the boy, because it's one of those moments where it could go one of two ways for the child. And I was really pleased because it happened and he could have got really embarrassed and upset. But luckily, after I'd obviously turned around and started to cry laughter, I turned around and I was like, oh gosh, he's okay, good. Because he was taking it like a good sport as well.
Yeah.
We had a really awkward 10 minutes at the end of maths where we were doing class photos. Now, all the classes mix up for maths. So I had a mixture of children from my class who normally go to another teacher for maths, but they'd come back. And we just had this 10-minute slot where we were all doing different lessons, and there's no way I could have carried on with my lesson and had all these children in. So we just stopped what we were doing, and we had a little game of times table showdown. But the way I play it with my children is it's just 1v1 at the front when we have, I've actually not done it this year at all, to be honest with you, but we just had this spare 10 minutes. So I got 2 children to the front, and I asked them a question because when I was at school, I was the champion of this game. Okay, and there was this maths game. They'd ask maths questions. Yeah, I just wanted to get in there.
Was you?
When I was 6 years old, I did win.
How many blow darts did you get shot on you? Huh?
No blow darts. My teacher took safeguarding quite extremely safely. So seriously.
Safely. My teacher took serious guarding very safely.
Shut up! I'm trying to rinse you. Anyway, yeah. When I was at school, I have my David Brent moment here. I was like, champion, me, year one champion. Anyway, the teacher got so annoyed that I kept winning that she stopped it being a maths game, got a kid up who liked football, and asked him who the manager of Liverpool was. And I was,
and you won that as well.
Nearly cried. No, that would be the Brent moment, wouldn't it? Gerard Houllier, I think so. So I lost. Anyway, playing this game with this kid, and we've been recently doing shape with the children. Shape's one of the things in maths which has really been hit by COVID. I don't know if you've noticed this as well, Hayden, because it's at the end of the year and we're prioritizing arithmetic and all the core parts of maths. Shape's really been hit. So the shape knowledge in general of the cohort is quite low. So we were teaching shape that week, and we've just been doing triangles, and there's 3 different types of triangle for listeners who've not heard this since they were in school: scalene, equilateral, isosceles, different types of triangles based on their sides. So my question to the children was, how many sides does a triangle have? Started off really simple, and they drew, because straight away both of them said 3, because we'd just done it that lesson. So I was like, okay, thankfully that's cool. My next question, I was like, okay, how many sides does a scalene triangle have? And the point was I was trying to trick them into thinking, oh, it's this really weird thing. Still 3 because it's still a triangle. So both of them went 5 together, and I was like, oh, what? I don't know where you've got 5 from, but it's not 5. Okay, let's have another go. Remember, a triangle has 3 sides, so a scalene triangle has. And the whole class went 3 sides. I was like, okay, good. So they're ready at the front now, these two. Turned around again. I was like, okay, how many sides does an isosceles triangle have? 5. Oh, no.
What?
It's still a triangle. It's still a triangle. It's like pentagon has 5 sides. Should we try it again? They're like, yeah. Okay, cool. How many sides does an equilateral triangle have? 4. Oh, not quite. So still wrong. And I said to him at this point, remember, no matter what I say, if it's a triangle, it has 3 sides. Pentagon has 5 sides.
We're running out of triangles now.
I think I'd run out of triangles at this point. So I said to them, right, I got them all ready. And I said to them, okay, I just explained how 5 is pentagon because they kept saying 5. And I was like, okay. So I said to him this one, okay, then, how many sides does a pentagon have? And this one boy turned around and went, triangle!
Not even 3.
and the whole class burst out laughing. I turned around, I was like, oh my God, I've just spent like 5 minutes explaining. He didn't even say 3.
Oh,
3 was the answer for all of them. He took it like a sport. He was laughing. He was annoyed he lost, but he was laughing as well. And it was just one of them moments where I was just like, it's not even, I know I flipped it and I tried to trick them a bit, but it never was triangle. Triangle was never the answer. How many sides does this shape have? Triangle.
Did you leave school that day thinking, I'm so glad that I spent my weekend planning a bunch of lessons and teaching them earlier in the week about all these shapes and triangles? Ooh.
Oh, but yeah, that just is one of those moments in class where you're genuinely just laughing so much. It's just like in despair, but funny as well.
I love that.
There was one other thing, and I know this is, you're probably looking at the timestamp thinking, why are these guys still talking?
The last one was one other thing. No, go on, because I know what this is. This is an email, right? We had someone write in. Go on.
Exactly.
Tell us about it.
And you know, we love hearing your stories, okay? And we have, I must say, we have a lot of listeners. We're in, I'm just going to say to you, Hayden, we're in 20 countries. That blows my mind. Wow, this podcast is streamed in the last 7 days constantly at about 20 countries. So we have repeated listeners in countries like Canada, Australia. We've got a big following. If you're in Australia and you're listening right now, how do you do, mate? And thank you for the ashes drubbing that you're giving us.
Yeah. If you guys wouldn't mind just changing your VPNs so that you're in a different country when you next log into your browser, then it will make it look like we've got even more. So that would be really appreciated too.
Yes, because everyone knows what a VPN is. Yes, I definitely
If they do, they're going, If they don't, they're just skipping past.
If they don't, they think it's just another word for pedagogy that we're not going to explain.
Yeah. Right, go on. What's this email?
Anyway, so firstly, started off really strong. I was hooked straight away. Hey, Lord Voldemort and the Northern one. I was like, yep, that's a listener right there. So this guy, he was talking about how he loves the podcast. He's found it. Our David Brent moment again. He's like, I'm already on number 11. So he's been just binging the podcast, having found it. So that's great to hear. And he's enjoying it. And he said that despite our fears, Hayden, that he's making you realize why he loves teaching. Because that's nice to hear, because we don't want to be putting people off the profession, because it does have lots of pros. As we
don't listen to that last episode.
Skip a couple of the ones. Yeah, the one that got us a 1-star review. But anyway, funnily enough, this is a story though from him about toxic schools, so toxic SLT. Okay. So I'm going to read this through to give you some background on me. So I'm reading it as him, obviously. To give you some background on me, I started my teacher training PGC in September 2019. So you know what's coming. And straight away I was like, oh, what a year to start training. Hayden?
COVID, right?
COVID. So, excuse me. I loved every minute until the COVID curbed it in March, leaving me not only to have to leave my school, but to then go to online learning up until the end of June. So when he says leave school, he means out of the classroom, which is obviously the best bit. As a consequence, I had to get a full-time job working as a domestic assistant at my local hospital whilst trying to find a teaching job. How amazing is that, by the way, in the COVID pandemic, to go out and get a job at your hospital to help out in the meantime?
Yes.
I thought that was brilliant. It took me until November 2020 to find a fixed-term maternity contract cover. So it's not ideal, but it's good. But then that was affected by the next lockdown. So not only did I miss months and months of training in the classroom, which as we know is vital for those newly qualified teachers, I was now having to teach a completely different way after only a couple of months of doing the job. So back online. Sorry for this being long-winded, but it just built up to my point. At the end of the year, another fixed term position at the same school became available. So I applied, interviewed, and I got that job. So he's on to his second fixed term contract in this school now.
Right.
And he was thrilled that he could finish his NQT year at the same school, which is a really important thing, I think, to have that consistency in your training.
His newly qualified teacher year.
His newly qualified teacher, thank you very much.
Not even called that anymore.
His VPN year. And even more so when I passed in December 2021. So all good so far. Passed in his second fixed term maternity contract. What I haven't mentioned at this point is that I wasn't the only teacher in the school on a fixed term contract this year. Now this, Hayden, by the way, is my first red flag. There were 7 of us on fixed term contracts. And we all knew, they were all made aware, very much so, that there were only 4 contracts up for grab at the end of the year. So only 4 permanent jobs available, 7 on fixed term. We know that can happen sometimes with maternity cover, etc. But when you've got 7 on a fixed term contract, that does kind of strike you as a bit odd.
Yeah.
Cue the showdown, which, by the way, made us all feel great. I can sense the sarcasm there. In which I was unsuccessful. Gutted wouldn't describe what I felt. They trained me. Why was what I was doing not good enough for them if they trained him? So I applied for other schools and was told multiple times that I was second place. I was beginning to lose hope. However, there was another chance later on in the year as another contract was up for grabs at his current school. So another one had become available other than the 4. I'm just going to say right now, it's a common theme we see, especially with newly qualified teachers, that kind of anxiety about just securing a job and, that consistency of a proper contract.
I hated that.
Yeah, and I think his point here comes into fruition in a minute about they trained him. So it's very odd they thought he wasn't capable of going on. Anyway, so interviews coming up. I went through my lesson thousands of times, asked staff best friends what they thought, and they all said it was a really good lesson. So I did the lesson. I was asked back for the interview, and then when I got home, I waited and waited for the phone call. At 6:30, the head rang and said, "We're not hiring anyone." For the second time, I was not good enough, and this time I was angry. I asked for feedback, very common thing in teaching, isn't it? To ask for that feedback so you can know what to do next time. And within it were some fair points about how I'd answered some of the interview questions, but then my teaching was openly questioned, and the final killer line as I left was, "You're not quite ready to teach at our school." I wanted to scream back, "But you trained me," and lots of other rather inappropriate things at this particular member of SLT, who clearly did not rate me, as the 2 times she observed me were the 2 times I was turned down. Anyway, now I ended up just doing the professional minimum, ticking work, not marking it to code, 8:30 to 4, going home as soon as possible, and no work.
My guy.
Yeah, that's my guy right there. He put all of his energy into finding himself a job, to which thankfully he did, but yet again, it was another fixed term contract in another school. Nevertheless, I then found out that the person who did actually get the job in my old school, so they did hire someone, on the last day of term, was the deputy head's niece.
I knew it. I knew he was going to say family. I knew it was going to be family. Course
Nepotism. Nepotism at its finest. I still keep in touch with all the staff in the school, and this year, even though they did not put her through her ECT, they've given the deputy head's niece a full-time contract after interview when the job advertised was for a fixed-term contract. I mean, fair to say, I'm glad I'm out of there and somewhere where I feel valued as a staff member. I thought it was a nice ending to his story where he went somewhere else, but I read that and I replied to him saying our jaw dropped to the floor a few times about just reading through that. But I will also say, it doesn't remotely surprise me. I can think of a lot of workplaces where that would be absolutely run of the mill, and I can see it happening.
Well, you know what Rishi would say? He's probably listening right now, so I'll tell you, Rishi. He'd say, "Yeah, it's who you know, isn't it? It's who you know. It's fair game. It's who you know. Make contacts. It's about who you know, not what you know."
I thought, number one, thank you so much for letting us know about this.
Yeah.
But number two, that kind of trying to get a job when you've just started teaching, I think it really does get to some people, and I see a lot of it online of like, oh, I've still not secured somewhere, and we know how retention is so low in teaching. It seems a bit of an oxymoron here. Like, why is retention so low and recruitment so tricky? But then some people really struggle to get a job, and it just depends area to area. Yeah,
and he says, like, you trained me. I wouldn't be surprised, mate, if they didn't train you at all, if they didn't really do anything to actually contribute to a training, because that is what often happens, I've seen anyway, when schools turn down their own trainees. It's like, yeah, because they didn't actually do any training. They didn't really put anything in place for them. And then they're like, oh, no, you're not good enough. It's like, well, you've had a year to help me. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah.
Oh, it's rubbish. But it sounds like they just wanted you out so they could get someone else in they had in mind already.
Yeah. Oh, would it be the niece of the assistant head potentially? Oh,
I know an assistant head and a niece that will be giving us a 1-star review. Oh dear, we probably can't say the person's name. Done? We can't say their name. What have we done? We don't want to. We don't want to. Just in case. So we're not doing it out on purpose. But I'll just say, big up that person. Thank you for writing in. That was a really, really nice email. You put so much care and thought into that, and we appreciated it massively. We'd like to see some more people writing in, which you can do at the following handles. Dylan,
it's my turn. You can email us at teachsleeprepeatpod@gmail.com. You can find us on Instagram at Teach Sleep Repeat Podcast. You can find me on Twitter, because it is me and not Hayden, at Teach SR Podcast. Or you could text us if you've got our number. I said that last time. It wasn't funny then, but I've said it again.
And it was less funny now. So, Dylan, I think we need to move on.
So come back after the jingle. Hayden, what can they do in the meantime whilst the jingle's playing?
I'm not doing this joke again. I'm not doing it.
What can they do?
I'm not doing it.
Whilst the jingle's playing? Just 3 seconds ago.
Get a cup of tea, have a break.
Don't be ridiculous. It's not long enough to do that, you idiot. Jeez. Anyway, come back after the jingle and we'll talk to our super special guest. So with us today, we have our next guest. I'm super excited for this one. I know Hayden's super excited. We always have a bit of tension here, and Hayden gives us a fake drum roll.
A fake drum roll, even though everyone's read in the title who it is.
It's Emily Weston. Hello, Emily.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm good. I'm really good, thank you. And I'm going to just expose us right now, because we pretend that we're saying hello for the first time, but we just spent 10 minutes talking, so none of that.
Dylan, stop breaking the fourth wall of the podcast, man. Come on.
Who are we fooling? Anyway, Emily, we're super excited. We've recently been getting some guests on our podcast. We had Sophie. Mm-hmm. We've had Gareth Metcalf, who's been on the podcast as well. You're our third guest, but again, one of the people who sprung to my mind straight away when I was like, oh, who can we get on the podcast? Because much like Sophie, I suppose, you have quite a following on social media. You're, I would say, influential in this sphere. But before we get into too much detail about what we're going to talk about today, I just want you to maybe just introduce yourself by telling us how long you've been teaching, what your main role in school is, and what your passions are in education.
So I've been teaching for 9 years now. So yeah, come September, I'll have been teaching for a decade, which seems wild. My main passions in teaching, reading. I think anyone who's seen what I do knows that. But also transition between primary and secondary, because I have been in year 6 for, I want to say 6 years now, but I've also taught in secondary school as a transition teacher. So I did a year in secondary, which I think completely changed my teaching. I'm so glad I did it, but it's really led to me sort of having that passion for getting year 6s ready for year 7, having like a year 6.5 where they're sort of trained, because it is a completely different environment. And just feeling confident to go up and make that next step. I think that's where my passion has really come alive over the last few years.
That's perfect, because I think what we'll dive into are basically those two main things there. And I think the listeners are really looking forward to getting a chunk into your expertise for reading, because I know Hayden and I are very maths orientated in the way we approach education. So getting that aspect will be really cool. And Hayden as well, as a year 6 teacher, that idea of transition, I'm less involved. So it fascinates me, that kind of journey. So I'll be listening intently there later on.
I'm really excited, like given the point of year as well. I'm looking forward to like hearing a bit more about your experience of that. But I know Dylan wants to start with a little game that he likes to play. He likes to torment our guests with this, this little game at the start, because he's a bit evil. So I'll hand back over to you, Dylan.
This genuinely, this was supposed to be a really nice, light-hearted thing, but every time we've done it so far, we have people with like sweaty palms. They're like worried they're going to say the wrong thing.
Knees are weak.
Yeah. Stop quoting Eminem. But the point of the game, and you've seen it before. I know you know about this game because you've seen Sophie go through it. I say go through it now that it's like a really negative experience.
Yeah, see, you're making it sound bad yourself.
Yeah, my palms weren't sweating until you said that. But...
And that's what we like to start the podcast off with, making people feel as uncomfortable as possible. So the way we're going to do this is I'm going to read out 10 words or phrases, and all I want from you, Emily, is your first thought. So 1 word reply where possible. Maybe we'll let you have 2 for feeling nice, but just your first response. Yeah, okay. So Hayden, I'm going to always do an example on Hayden. So okay. Hayden, just to show everyone how this works, if I said to you, muggy classrooms, you would say...
Horrible.
Horrible. There you go. So
Horrible.
we all know school classrooms right now are not the place to be in, especially in upper school. Not the nicest environment after lunch. So, ready, Emily?
Yes, I'm ready.
Marking,
Unnecessary.
reading,
Amazing.
term 6,
Fun.
twinkle,
Useful.
transition.
Important.
See, we could have just stopped the podcast there. That's it. That's our transition chat.
That's it, done.
There's
Thanks,
a
guys.
transition into transition.
I'm just going to say, Emily, you're smashing this. Come on,
I
keep
know.
going, Dylan. This is
I was
good.
like, she read this list or something. Next one, SATs.
Controversial.
Good. Teacher wellbeing,
Vital.
planning.
Waste of time. I squeeze that all together as one word.
I love that.
Yeah.
Just say it quick and it counts.
Hyphenated.
PPA.
Underused.
Ofsted.
Change.
I think that's the most popular answer for that one because
Yeah,
it's so politically correct.
I really look forward to that one because I think we've used that one with everybody, and there's always been really interesting answers. Can we just really quickly before we go into the main discussion points for PPA? You said underused. I just want to know what you mean by that because I'm intrigued.
I think that it's just not utilized in the right way. I think lots of people don't actually use it to target what needs to be done because you're never in that quiet space. You're always being pulled for other things. I think the work is put on you, and I think actually you end up fighting fires rather than doing the work that underpins everything in the classroom. And I think that PPA actually is sort of seen as something that we get and maybe not seen as something that we should use efficiently. I don't know if that's just the schools that I've been in, but I found that actually I've personally never been able to use my PPA properly because of all the other things that come up and all the other fires I have to fight in the day, and it just needs a revamp maybe.
What would be your perfect use of PPA?
To genuinely just get your lessons and your resources prepared for the next week. I think so often marking is involved, and actually it does. If you're having to sit there and do it in your PPA and it's not in the moment, it's probably not going to have an impact. I think things like, although it's got assessment on it, PPA is part of assessment. If the assessment is so onerous, it's taking all of your PPA to do, and you can't be prepared for the week after, it's not going to be useful. So I guess underused. I think maybe undervalued would have been a better word for it.
Yeah, okay.
That is dependent on schools. Some do it really well, but I haven't seen it done really well anywhere I've been.
I've got to say as well, just jumping on that, because I think the frustrations lie definitely on us from Hayden and I in the past, saying that it feels like it's a bit of a token job, and like you said, you can't sink your teeth into what actually is required to deliver teaching properly. It just fascinates me what you said about being underused, because it's not something we've delved into, and I want to just like kind of pick your brain a little bit here, because do you feel like it's something coming from teachers themselves? Or do you feel like it's kind of our hands are tied and therefore it becomes a waste of time? Do you feel like... I feel sometimes myself, I waste that time because I end up thinking, oh, well, maybe I can just get that marking done I would have done after school normally, and then I can complain after school, even though I've left school early. I'm like, well, actually, wait, did I use that time properly? Would you say it's more teachers being proactively not using the time properly? Or maybe, like you said, from the top down a bit more, you just expected to do so much?
I think it's top down, because I think if you use it, it's like PPA time is planning, preparation and assessment is marking, right? I think if the marking needs to be done, doing it in your PPA time is still a good use of your time. However, if that is onerous to the point of you are spending your whole PPA having to do that, then that's an intrinsic problem. I think I've loved this year at the current school that I'm at, we get to go home for PPA. We're a one form entry school, so we're able to do that. And I am so much more productive because I can go home, have that break to have my lunch, be in my own environment, sit at my kitchen table, potter about. Do you know what I mean? It's a bit more relaxed. So I get more done. The books stay at school because they're being used, or they're, I'm not bringing them all home. So actually I get so much more done because I can just sit on my laptop in a familiar, quiet space. Whereas actually at school, I end up sat in the back of an office or in the staff room, and you never actually end up doing your work because someone pulls you for this, that, and the other. I think it's from the top down. I think it's just how each school uses it. And as I said, some must do it really well. But so far, I found that I just think there's a lot more room for work on it to help teachers be more productive.
I think I fully agree with you, and I'm reflecting on my 8 years in the game as well. And I have never once, ever in the 3 schools I've worked at, used a PPA to plan a single lesson ever. I've just never done it. And I always put it down to me. I'm always like, no, I just can't, I just can't focus. But in reality, if I was at home, I would plan, because that is where I plan. I plan at home. And actually, I don't think the PPA is I don't think it's me in PPA that's the problem. I think it's probably what you said. It's more that I can't get my teeth stuck into it. So I hate starting things that I can't do and finish and fully be involved in. I need all of my brain. And you just know that in PPA, you're going to get disturbed, or you're going to be working with other people. And there's people around, as great as that can be, it can be quite hard to just get involved, because suddenly there's a conversation you need to be part of now. Oh, what are we going to do next week for this thing? Oh, I was trying to do this. Okay, I'm now in this conversation, So I think you're absolutely right. I would really like PPA at home. I think that's a good move.
Yeah, I absolutely love it. I think some weeks as well, because I know that I've got that whole from lunchtime up until really the end of Tuesday evening, and you can plan it how you want. So sometimes I'll go to the gym on my lunch break for that hour, and then I will come home, but then instead I'll work till 5, because actually I've had that mind break, I've had that sort of reset, and then I come back and I'm so much more productive, because I'm not thinking, oh well, I've got to go to the gym later and I've got to go and pick up my food shop. I can almost have that sort of reset hour to do that, and then get on and just sit and solidly work for a few hours. It works for me. I know some people might think, oh, I'd hate that, but I really love it. And yeah, I don't get distracted by children, staff, other people that are around.
It's that autonomy, isn't it? Of as professionals, I'm not being funny. The list of things we've got to do is going to get done. Otherwise the job wouldn't function. So the idea of being trusted enough to go off site, and I've heard sometimes from people who get their PPA off site, they've kind of also been instructed to not be seen out during what would be PPA hours. Oh no, you can't nip to the shop, and it's well, no, that's really useful for me. And then do you know what? If I can get that stuff done, I might look at the clock later and it's 6:30 and I'm still working, and you might actually get more out of me as a result. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, I think as teachers, if we get it done, we get it done. My planning ultimately has to be done for the week after. My lessons have to be resourced. Doesn't matter if I do it at between 1 and 3, or whether I do it between 11 p.m. and 1 a.m. It doesn't matter, as long as I've got that work done. And actually, it just gives you a little bit more freedom that people in most other jobs get. We don't. We're really tied down to those hours, even our lunch breaks, unless you work nearby a food place where you can do your food shop, you're sort of stuck. Whereas when I worked in an office, only for 2 years before I became a teacher, but there was so much more freedom with your start times, your going home times, what you do with your lunch hour. And I think it just gives you a little bit of that back, doesn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. So that was a great chat. I love those impromptu ones. We spend so much time thinking, okay, we're going to talk about this or that, and then all of a sudden, let's talk about PPA for 10 minutes. But no, I really interesting insight there. I suppose, like we said, there's 2 prongs to this episode we really want to dive into. One is the English aspect, especially with reading and whole class reading, that I think we'll start off with, and then we'll finish off with a transition talk at the end, which I'm really looking forward to. But just to start us off, Emily, with reading, and I know we touched upon this with Sophie, and she actually name dropped you. She name dropped you in the episode and said, oh, you need to talk to Emily. So here we are, we're talking to Emily, because I think one of the huge things Hayden and I sense from the community, from our friends who are teachers as well, if you're not passionate about books, which you are, a sense of, oh, am I doing the best for these children? What's an appropriate book to pick for children? How do I know, unless I'm reading 5 children's book a week, which I'm just not, because it's not something that I want to do in my spare time, although I find it useful when I'm planning. I don't have that breadth of knowledge. So from your point of view, starting the blog, the Teacher Bookworm, your love for literature, what would be your advice to kind of those teachers who don't share the absolute passion but want to deliver a quality experience for children? How can we go about that?
I think it's about just sort of reaching for those experts that are online. People who do read a lot of books are going to be able to give you quite good opinions on them. But I think even just if you don't want to read the whole book, read the first chapter, because you will get a flavour of that book, the tone of it. So if your class are quite a serious class and like a serious book, you can tell from that first chapter if it's too funny for them, or if it is going to hit them in a place that's going to matter for them. I think even just reading that first page or first chapter is really going to help. So I'd always recommend doing that, because going into books blind, I mean, I do read a lot, but I've gone into books blind before and hated them. And it was so hard to then get the children passionate because I wasn't. And I don't think you need to like love reading to be passionate about a story. But yeah, get a flavour of it by reading a page. You know, don't buy the book, sneak into Waterstones, read the first page first, and then you sort of get the idea of the tone. But there's such a wealth of things online. There's blogs, there's websites like Books for Topics where they can pick out books for different topics for you. And I think use those, utilize what is around you, utilize the experts who do like reading.
I want to jump on something really quick there, because it's another point that I made, that I sometimes, again, I'd love your opinion on this, because as someone who's not necessarily thinking, oh, I read this children's book and we simply have to do this. And then from the history lead, you might be saying, oh, actually, your topic this term, you need to make sure in English that your book's linked to that topic. And I'm wondering where you sit on this kind of seesaw of how important is it to have those cross-curricular links in English, or is it more important to be getting a quality text and maybe, you know, you'd miss out on certain books because they don't fit the criteria of your topic? Like, is that a bad thing?
Don't pick for topic would be my advice always. I know some schools ask you to do it, and if they do, obviously you have to do that. But I personally would always pick a book that I know my class are going to enjoy, because actually, again, like there's some topics like the Maya. There are no books out there, and you shoehorn in a book about the jungle or something that's tenuously linked, and actually you then don't really enjoy it because it's very obviously there for that purpose. Whereas actually, if you've got I've got a class at the minute who constantly ask me for football books. So if I find a book that's got football in it and inspires them to keep reading, that's going to have a million more reasons for them to carry on reading and actually improve their writing as well. So that would always be my advice.
I guess the topics, like, you're actually absolutely right, because the topics you do definitely impact how important that decision it is, isn't it? Like, when we'll do a classic World War II topic, it's such a year 60 kind of thing. Yeah. And World War II, that's great. You know, there are so many books out there that will be recommended by people that absolutely link to World War II. But you're so right. When it's a topic on like some random point in history or like a geography unit that you're doing, it's like, really, are we going to sacrifice the quality of the book just to get this link in, which probably doesn't make much difference other than look good on like a cross-curricular bit of paper that your school can go, hey, Ofsted, look how cross-curricular we are. So I think you're right. We do need to just take it case by case and probably not overvalue the cross-curricular thing.
Yeah, and like you said, like World War II has such a wealth of books. And if I was doing a World War II topic, I'd probably know one that I think my class would enjoy. But actually, there are very few topics I've found where there's genuine books that I want to use with my class or think are good to use with my class. And actually, there's so many other amazing authors and amazing books that they can discover that are going to carry them on reading. Because ultimately, that's the point of using a book in English, isn't it? To, yes, improve their writing, but to keep them wanting to read and wanting to read on. And shoehorning in a book for topic doesn't always do that, I don't think.
Yeah, so dive in a bit deeper here then, because this is something... again, I'm looking at you, Emily, as almost the beacon here of the passion for reading and the advocacy of how to get quality books in front of children. Because I struggle sometimes, and I really wonder where the line is here, because I'm really passionate about inclusivity and representation. And again, whether that impacts on the quality of the book that I'm picking for my class, for example. And just a deeper thought, I suppose, here. The question I'm asking is, do you think that there's a responsibility as the class teacher to ensure not only representation of the different authors and inclusivity of, you know, female, male, different backgrounds, ethnicity, etc., but also the content of the books themselves? Because especially with Pride Month recently, there was, you know, these backwards opinions of it's bad just to even have representation in a book. Not even necessarily, it's not advocating it, it's not saying this is the way to live. It's simply a character who has a partner who's the same sex, the same gender. And there's, you know, a furore around, should we be informing parents? Is this acceptable in primary school? I'm just wondering what your opinion is as someone so passionate about the breadth of literature there is. What's our role as a primary school teacher? Are there certain things we should be making sure we put in there? Are there certain lines we shouldn't cross? What's our role, really?
I think ultimately your bookshelf should reflect the children in your class. And, you know, I think that we're helping them exponentially by showing them themselves in a book. And whether that is, you know, having two dads, I know Lee Newberry's book, has that in it, and it's an amazing book. Or whether it's something like Elle McNichol, where she's got an autistic character in there. I think it's so important just to have those on your shelves. I don't think picking them as your class read is necessarily something that you should have to do through the year, because I think the books will lend themselves to you. And as you get to know your class, you'll know what ones to pick. But I think it's about having them available for those children to read, sort of being able to signpost them to them as well. But yeah, I mean, if children don't see themselves in books, again, are they going to be inclined to keep reading them? Probably not, because they're not going to feel like they're part of the story, and that's what you want them to feel.
So I think that's really powerful. I completely agree. And I think seeing themselves in books is such a vital part. And I want to come back to you with something someone said to me once, and I think it kind of frustrated me, because there's this whole furore, and I suppose I'm going to the other end now. I think inclusivity is really important, and having that, children in your class, almost inevitably, one or two of them will have family members where there's LGBTQ representation, and different races in your class, etc., especially based on your demographic where you are in the country. I think the thing I was really interested in was where we draw the line on the other end of when, as teachers, we should not teach books and we should have them out of the classroom. And the biggest thing recently, the two biggest things I can think of are David Walliams' books and Roald Dahl books. Because as someone, and I'm going to say this, Emily, you might disown me and leave the chat now. When I started my career, I very much fell into the whole, well, David Walliams is an incredibly popular author. My children love him. I'm going to read it to them because, wow, what a brilliant way to, everything you've been saying so far of getting them engaged and kind of mirroring what they like. And I couldn't have had a more swift turn, in my opinion, just from having my eyes opened online and people pointing out, actually, this is obviously not correct. But there was always people who don't like change. And someone said once, and it really irked me, and the line was, I'll pick the best book for my children, regardless to what it's about. And I just think it was very narrow-minded to suggest that, firstly, they have managed to pick the best book in the world. I was like, well, have you read every single book? Like, is that the best book? I think there's going to be a lot of books. But secondly, just this idea to have no ability to kind of be introspective and just think, oh, maybe I was wrong.
This will probably shock some people, because we all know my feelings about David Walliams. I think I've made them very clear over the years. I did once read one of his books to my NQT class, because when I was an NQT, I've always been a prolific reader, but I didn't really read children's books, to be honest. So I did pick it up because I thought, well, he's very popular. It's probably a very good book. And yeah, the children did love it. But actually, as I've gone through my teaching career, I've realized that his books don't have content in it that I would particularly want to teach my children. But not only that, actually, these children can access these books pretty much anywhere. Most children will have them at home anyway. And I think if they want to read them, I'd never stop them. I don't stop them from bringing them in. I don't stop them from reading them. But actually, it's our duty to sort of show them what else is out there, not just in the sense of the characters or the themes in the book, but just of what they're not going to be able to see at home normally, and say to them, well, you might love those books at home, but actually these are some other books I think you'll love because of that. I mean, he churns out a new one every 3 minutes. So we need to show them the other books that are out there, so that the next one pops up on the supermarket shelf and actually they look to the right of it next time. I think that's what we should be doing. I'd never stop a child from reading a book they enjoy. Although if they brought in Jamie Oliver's book, I'd have a question about that.
Wait, is that a fiction book, or do you mean a cookbook?
Oh no, he's written a fiction book.
Oh,
has he?
Okay.
So saying.
When we say written, do we mean he's put his name on a fiction book?
Yeah, I mean that's always the question, isn't it, with celebrity ones? Did they actually write it themselves? But yeah, I mean, if they brought that one in, I might question them slightly. But I think if they're reading at home, great. Read all you like, but I think as teachers it's our duty to sort of show them what else is out there. Lots of people say, oh, it gets them reading, that's what's important, but I always use the McDonald's analogy that everyone says, yeah, you can have McDonald's every now and again, but there's other food out there that you need to eat. And I think that's the same with books.
Wait, there's more food than McDonald's?
There's some of those. KFC.
Oh yeah, KFC, of course.
Yeah, I think that's a really convincing point, and for someone like me, who I'm very much the opposite of you. Like, I really don't feel confident when it comes to reading. I've not read many children's books outside of my career, outside of the books I would read anyway, like for my job. And I was one of those people, again, like David. I just saw the David Walliams. I was like, oh, cool, kids love this. So I made sure to get loads of David Walliams books for the bookshelf. Do you know what I mean? And I was a little bit like, at first I was like, oh, well, it does get kids reading, but you're so right. Kids were already reading them. Genuinely, every teacher could not mention David Walliams for the next 5 years and children would still read them. We don't need to do that. Our job as teachers is to expose them to other literature. And there are books that are just as good as David Walliams. So when people say to me now, oh, but it gets them gets them reading though, doesn't it? I'm like, yeah, cool. So do other books. Other books are just as good. But as a not so confident teacher, I just don't happen to know those books. So I totally rely on experts like you when you'll suggest things through maybe your blog or other ways. I've seen on like the big Facebook groups that we're all in, recommended reading lists before, and I'm like, oh my god, I'll download these, I'll treasure these things, because I know that person who's made that list is so much more experienced than me. And now I can just get some of these books, like you said, read the blurb, read the first chapter and think, cool, I know these are good books, hopefully this will fit with my class. So yeah, really appreciate what you do and other people like yourself who read more.
Well, that's why we do it. I don't expect everybody to read all the time or want to read all the time. Same as like other subjects like DT. I need to come and find an expert because I don't know how to make a bridge out of plywood.
Oh, that was my next question.
Sorry, I've already answered it for you. But we've all got our own expertise, and like you two said you really like maths. I like teaching maths, but am I an expert in it? Absolutely not. And I would look to experts for that. Why is reading any different? Why would we expect somebody to know all of the books all of the time? I think as long as you reach out for that advice and you reach for an expert in the topics that you're not so confident in, I don't see a problem. And that's why I did make my blog initially, because it's supposed to be a little bite-size pick of a book for somebody to get a feeling of it. I made an author of the week resource with Cassie, and we made that so that people could just see all the authors out there, show the children all the authors that are out there, but without even really having to do any of the work behind it, because we've done it all for them. So
perfect. As a teacher, when I hear the words, we've done all the work for you, I'm like, whoa. I want to just finish this chat off because I'm going to push you both to come down on one side, because everything we said so far, I completely agree with. But I'm going to ask you both a question now. So Hayden, you're in the interview chair as well.
Nice.
If I was to ask you for the main reason, if I was to ask you for the main reason why you wouldn't push a David Walliams book in front of your children as a class read or a class book, would it be more because they already read them and you want to open their mind, or would it be more because you think it's inappropriate, the actual content in there? Because I think they're two very different reasons. And that if your class were constantly reading books of any ilk, whether they were appropriate or not, I think we'd still have option one. But do you feel more strongly about David Walliams because of the content itself, and you think we shouldn't be pushing that in front of the children?
Yeah. I feel it's the content. I think if any other authors put the content in there that he does, it wouldn't be acceptable. And, Roald Dahl, people say, oh, Roald Dahl did it. Yeah, he lived decades ago when actually society accepted things like that. Should they have? No, but they did. And actually, David Walliams has no excuse for it. We're in 2023. Why are you still writing tropes and stereotypes that should no longer exist? And I do say that to my classes, once you've built that relationship and that rapport, and we discuss books and talk about all the other things that we read, why can't we talk about that? And actually some of them have gone away, reflected on the book they've read and gone, actually, yeah, now you've said it, I don't really like the way that character's portrayed. And I do think it's an important conversation to have with the right class and the children that are, mature and old enough to have that conversation.
I think it's definitely a balance for me. I think both points are really valid, and I don't know, but I think I agree with exactly what you said. I do think there's a slippery slope somewhere, and I don't think it's within this conversation really, but I know that in general, where is the line in general for when teachers can have the say on like a cultural thing? I don't know. Like, when can I say, no, you can't study this now? Like, when does it become my personal belief that's maybe a bit overbearing and actually just a general consensus? Because I think the David Walliams thing is pretty much a general consensus. It's quite clearly, and obviously in our British culture, and we have to do British values at school, it's quite clearly not British values to have the stereotypes and promote them in the way that they're portrayed in David Walliams' books. But I do think there are other topics that we won't get into now that maybe one teacher might say, yeah, no, I don't teach my kids this because that's just wrong. And someone else might come along and go, well, hang on a minute, like, that's very much your kind of bias and your view. Where does it stop?
Next time Emily's on, you know what we're going to talk about, Emily. So we're already lining you up for the next time.
I would say that just in reply to that though, my only thing would be my book corner is all my own books. So everything in there is funded by myself. and put in there myself. So for somebody who's, been given the books that go in their book corner, it might be slightly different, but I just don't put the books in there that I don't think are great or don't think have good themes in them. I would never stop a child reading them, but am I going to provide that book? I think that's me is where the line is drawn. I would never stop them from reading it, but I might not open the book on my bookshelf.
I think that's a really good line to draw, and I think that's a nice place to finish off there, because you're right, we're not banning books, and this is I think what the media will pick up on. I can imagine in a few weeks GB News being like, the teacher bans books. Like, no, I've just not bought it and put it in the corner. I've not banned it. So fascinating. I would like to move on, sticking with reading here, because again, it's something I know you're an advocate of, whole class reading. And this idea of, from my point of view, kind of looking from the outside in, it seems like this unbelievable method, this unbelievable way of bringing a whole class of children with you and reading quality texts on the way. And I love the idea, but my initial thoughts always come to the practicality. So first of all, just for our listeners listening, because they might think, what are you talking about? We have a lot of non-teachers listen as well. What do we mean when we say whole class reading and reading lessons?
So it's the whole class reading. So you're all looking at the same text. There's not separate groups of children that are sent to do different tasks, or some are adult led, some aren't. It's the whole class being involved in, picking apart an extract or a piece of a story and reading it together, and just being exposed to the language, the themes, the discussion that comes from that.
So that absolutely, and I think what we can jump in straight there, now everyone knows the context, because I think a lot of adults, especially like even myself, if I didn't become a teacher, I would think back to school and I would remember the rectangle table and the circle table and the triangle table and the oblong table and I'd be thinking, oh, okay. And as a child, very adept, you knew what these tables were. You knew that these children got more support from adults. You knew that these children were often pushed to onto something you seemed as more difficult. And I think a lot of people have the idea in their head of that kind of grouping. And even teachers we still group, we still put support in place. I suppose my question is, as someone who makes sure children always have reading books that they take home that's appropriate for their level, and the levels can be very different within the same class, how would you go about practically ensuring that the children less able to access the text still can, and potentially the ones at the top are more stretched? And where would you place the book in difficulty? Would it be more appropriate for the tops and you help the bottoms? Or would it be middle of the road and you kind of stretch and support in a different way? How would you make sure that kind of ability dynamic isn't kind of ruined by the fact you're all reading one book?
I mean, controversially to start with, I don't give banded books once I'm in year 5, 6. I think that actually you're going to turn kids off reading. So I don't have that problem because I don't ban them in the first place. But I would always pick a book that's going to stretch. So my first thing that I would want to do when I pick a whole class reading book is pick one that's going to stretch with vocabulary. Not always themes, because you don't need to stretch them both, but it's going to have vocabulary in there that's going to, help them. I think, when you're in year 6, vocabulary in the SATs test is often the one that they find the most tricky. So the more I can expose them to, just for osmosis, is, the better. But I think after that, it's about something that they're all going to want to access. You're never going to hit every kid. Not every child is ever going to like every book you pick. But ultimately, I want to pick a book that most children are going to enjoy and want to delve in more into and want to have that discussion, because actually a lot of their learning isn't from the reading itself. I don't think it's the discussions that are promoted from that book, and that's what helps them. So they'll all read along. They can use their rulers, they can use overlays, whatever they need to do to read that text. But it's all of that valuable discussion afterwards, I think, has the most impact. So I'd always pick something that stretches vocabulary wise, but actually focus on themes that they're going to enjoy or want to pull apart. It's knowing your class, isn't it?
Traditionally, that slot which whole class reading kind of like takes up in the day would be filled with guided reading, which is a phrase we use a lot in teaching. And listeners that maybe don't work in teaching might remember themselves the guided reading slot from when they were at school. I personally, and I don't know if this is controversial or not, I genuinely don't. I really hate guided reading. I really, really hate guided reading as a teacher for so many reasons. One, it's just so annoying to manage. I find that I just can't do it. When you have like 4 different groups and they're all doing something different, I can't manage it. You basically always work with the same children. And even when you say, oh no, we're going to rotate, it's like, well, you're not though, because as soon as you leave that group of children that you decided to work with last time, they're not going to be able to do the thing. And I just really don't like it. And would would you say that whole class reading is kind of supposed to take over the guided reading, the traditional guided reading, or do you still see a place for them being used in tandem?
No, I think it takes over, and I think I'm lucky. I mean, I've done whole class reading my whole teaching career. I've worked in, I think my first school had guided reading for a couple of terms, and then we switched to whole class, and I hated it. But I mean, I can still remember when I was at primary school, I was in the top guided reading group, because you do know where you are.
Oh, go on. So was I, So Hayden, where were you, mate?
Oh, not me.
We were put in a group, and because we'd already finished our work and our book that we were supposed to do, we were set this task to read a playbook, a book written like a play, and record it on a tape player. And I genuinely think it must have been 6 weeks of us sat in this little back room recording a play on a tape player. And I thought, what did I ever gain from that? I didn't learn anything. We basically did it in a week and then just sat in there doing absolutely nothing. I think I was year 5 when that happened. Or you were given a book that you were expected to just sit down. They'd say, right, read up to page 59. And for somebody like me, who was quite a fast reader, I've always been fairly fast. I would have done it in a minute, and then I'm just expected to sit there the rest of the activity. So I think having that negative experience as a child probably made me already come into teaching with a little bit of a negative view of it, maybe. And that's what I love about whole class reading, though, is that no one's sort of sat on their own, or they don't just finish a task. You're all doing it together. And I think it's that inclusivity of every child. Funnily enough, I'm being observed in whole class reading tomorrow for this exact reason. It's just about how to put those children. Wow, more the merrier.
What you don't know, Emily, is we've been contacted by your school. This is the first step in the process.
Well, there you go. I mean, the more the merrier. Everyone can come and observe, but I think it's about having those children to have that, not putting that glass ceiling on them, not saying, oh, you're only capable of reading this book about frogs.
Yeah, so true.
You can join in.
I'm sorry, but you've managed to, in one sentence, encapsulate what those. I know what books you're talking about just from that one sentence.
You know the book. You know the book that poor little group gets stuck with every time. No, we're going to give them good, high quality books that they can enjoy and not just learn a fact about what's made.
Yeah. That's funny.
True.
Yeah, you've perfectly encapsulated guided reading, really. And I'm really interested because I feel like with whole class reading a couple of years ago, I definitely tried to do it, and my memory is failing me terribly because I can't remember if I was successful in doing it or not. It was when I worked at a different school, so it's maybe 4 years ago now. But as someone who's not as confident maybe in teaching English, do you have any kind of advice to just get over that first hurdle? Like, what should I do? Like, let's say I've got a class and the range of ability is fairly wide. Let's say just like a couple of year groups if we're going on like kind of English assessments. Mm-hmm. How do I jump into whole class reading once I've picked a text already? What do I actually do in that time?
So I always start with, if they don't have their own copy of a book, obviously having an extract is really useful, but I always get them to pick out the vocabulary that they don't know first, because how can I expect a child to answer a question? Obviously, I'm not training them for SATs when I do this, because who wants to teach the test? But I don't want to ask a question where I'm setting them up to fail because they don't know what one of the words mean. So the first thing I always do is get them to pick out the words that they don't know. And actually, the more you do that, the more confident children will be to say, actually, I don't know what this word means. I model that. I'll say, oh, this word's come up. I can't. We had one the other day, and I knew I could use it. Palpable, and I said I can use this word. I have no idea how I define that to you guys. So we looked it up together, and we had that discussion. And actually, it's saying to them, it's okay not to read and understand a word. We're all in that position. So that's where I would always start with any session.
Emily, can I come in really quickly?
Yeah.
Have you heard of the word undurfed?
Undurfed.
Dylan's trolling me right now. He's trolling me hard.
I'm sorry. Our listeners will know from very, very, very early on in this podcast, Hayden was reading a book to his class, and he came across a word that he read as undurfed, and he was undurfed children. And he was
I'll spell it to you.
He didn't know. Yeah.
I'll spell it to you. Okay, this is the word, and I did a whole 5-minute activity about trying to work out the meaning of it by reading around in context. Okay, I thought I was being really clever. UNDERFED.
UNDERFED.
So Hayden reads it as undurfed.
Underfed.
Underfed. So I thought the word said unnerved, and I thought it was an adjective describing children in, I can't remember what the book was now, I've forgotten.
It was Borderlands. Borderlands?
No, Floodlands. That's what it was, Floodlands. And I think it was that book. Yeah, it was. And underfed, and I did this whole activity, and we Googled it and everything together. I was like, let's find out the definition, and it described, I still didn't twig, it described, they've not had much food, skinny. I was like, oh, wow, okay, it does work in context, doesn't it? And this boy just went, Mrs. Stevens, I think that says underfed. And then it's just so embarrassing. So embarrassing. We now have T-shirts.
I had to bring it up. Yeah.
No, I wouldn't worry. I did an English language degree, and I remember being sat in my university seminar, and I went, what is a hyperbole? And my friend was like, that's not hyperbole, Emily. And I was like, oh. And that was in my English language degree. So I think that is a fine mistake.
No, that's fine.
That's brilliant. I thought, by the way, on this rolling theme here of not knowing what words say, until I was literally like a teacher, so like mid-20s, right? I thought all of those emails that it said Norply, and I was like, this Norply is really popular. this Nor, like, how is Norply have got themselves into a lot of businesses that I'm getting emails saying Norply from everyone. No reply, just telling you not to reply to that email.
I love that. That's so good. You never told me this. That would have been ammo for me.
Ammo? Oh, right. I thought you said you couldn't read ammo. I was like, that's a very easy one.
No, ammo for me to get back at you for taking the mick.
Well, there you go. Yeah, exactly. Sorry, Emily, I derailed your flow there. But I'll just come back in then, just to finish off this whole whole class reading, because it is, I think what Hayden's saying is people are apprehensive about that ability range. But I will say one other thing, having done something similar in the past, even when it's not necessarily this kind of theme, but you have a book with your children, right? And you read bits of them as you go, but maybe also not just a class read in the afternoon, but it does link to your English planning. Maybe it's like less involved, but I would say most classes in the country will be working from a text when it comes to their English lessons, however they do it. Do you have any tips here? And maybe when you're doing whole class reading, maybe for a term, and you have a book, how on earth do you get through it? Because I have always struggled with finishing a whole class text because of the sheer amount of time we have to spend stood reading, and also then spend time on objectives, and then spend time on practicing word meaning or inference or retrieval in what can be quite a small time slot in the school calendar. Is it just down to timetabling, or is there a special way to do this?
I think it is timetabling, because every other school I've worked in where I've done it, we've always finished the book with good time in the term. But this school I'm at now, our school day is so much shorter than any other school I've been at. And we've really struggled, because I usually don't have a separate class read. I'll read my whole class reading book and we will just read that together, because essentially I've picked a text that they should enjoy, not just work from. And then it's also showing them that although we are doing some work from this book, actually we're still reading it for pleasure and we can still enjoy it. It's sort of trying to show them that reading for pleasure is always there. So that's how I normally manage it, because we do the reading session and I'll always aim for one chapter, which actually, so per term you've got roughly 30 chapters you can get through if you do one a day. So if we read a little bit in the afternoons on top of that, we normally get the book done, but that is completely down to the timetable that you're given, because I just find my day way too short to do that at the minute. Especially if I want to give them a chance to independently read their own books as well. Sometimes I favour that over doing a whole class read, because they're so into their books, they just want that 10 minutes.
Yeah. But I've always found there's exactly what you said there. There's always got to be something that has taken as a result, and usually it's at the detriment of, like you said, their own read, which they can be very passionate about. And as a teacher, we can do our best, can't we, to pick a book, but is it likely that all 32 children in my class will be obsessed with this book and like it more than their own personal book? Probably not. Maybe I could hit a lot of them with good research and using your lists and things. But yeah, no, fascinating. It's really, really interesting, because it's something I think is brilliant. We don't do it in this way in our school. We do it separate ways. I know there's different ways to do stuff, but I think from what you said there, it sounds like it's the way forward, to be honest.
I really love it. I think if you finish the book as well in good time, then you're almost giving them that time at the end of the term to read what they want as well. You know, you do get the best of both worlds, but sometimes I always put reading in the afternoon onto my schedule, but whether that's independent reading or class book reading will completely depend how the day is going, to be honest, and how much they're all loving their books. most children in my class are loving a book they're reading at the minute. So I sometimes think a little bit like we've gone out in the sun last week to read for 15 minutes because actually that's a really nice way for them to finish their day.
Yeah,
But
nice.
And yeah, it's going to encourage them to do so, isn't it? And read.
So to kind of wrap up this part of our conversation within this episode, for people like me and the listeners that are thinking, oh, I want to go and I want to learn more about this. Obviously, we're not going to talk the whole episode about whole class reading, like every single step to it. Is there anywhere we can kind of go to learn a bit more about this, or do you recommend any particular websites, or have you got your own resources that you could point us towards to learn a bit more about whole class reading?
I think if you want to start doing whole class reading, Literacy Shed has some amazing schemes that you can use on there. They are based on Vipers, so it depends whether you want to use like the vocabulary inference questions. But they are a really useful starting point because they're broken down chapter by chapter. They have inference questions, a summary, a prediction, everything you could want from every single chapter. And I just think that's really useful, particularly if you don't read around a lot of books yourself. You can see not only what the book is, but you can actually see a bit of the themes and the content going through. I think their resources are a really good starting point. And obviously Ashley Booth does do training on it as well. Like he's the go-to for whole class reading, really. But other than that, if you just ask on Twitter as well, there's so many people doing it in so many different ways. I'm sure there's local schools that you can go and observe or go and see.
Yeah, brilliant.
Yeah, really good starting point.
That's the one. We'll find you on Twitter, Emily. We'll follow your guidance.
Hayden, this is what Hayden doesn't know. This is why I make the Twitter and he doesn't get involved, because we found Emily on Twitter, Hayden.
I know that. By we, I was being part of the viewers, Dylan.
Oh, okay.
We as a collective viewership.
Okay. We'll get on.
But they're all here for Emily anyway.
Yeah, they're exactly that. So very, very quickly, we're going to move on then. But before we get into transition, I did just want to pick your brain because it's something, again, that we find quite fascinating. And it's something we've never done. And it's kind of linked there into what we just said about the kind of breadth of ability. And it's the fact that you teach year 5-6. So you teach a mixed class. And I know Sophie referenced the fact that her school was smaller and they share children as well. But we didn't really go into much detail about this. And it's just something in general we want to touch on quickly. How have you found teaching one class with two different year groups in it, so children in year 5 and year 6? Does it exaggerate those gaps in attainment, do you find? Do you feel like it's tricky to kind of manage the curriculum? Like how do you go about it? How do you find it?
I'm sure people have different experiences of it, but I've genuinely not found it much more different to teaching a whole class of the same year group. I think I've been really lucky with my class though, because they are a great bunch. They just sort of get on with things. But like with year 5 and year 6, I think they're so interlinked, aren't they? Like the English framework is essentially the same. So English, you do it as normal. I think maths, a lot of year 6 is scaffolding up from where they are in year 5. So definitely. I tend to teach to 6 and then just scaffold down, because actually the more that year 5 access year 6 stuff ready for next year, the better. But I do tend to scaffold down rather than have to scaffold them.
Yeah, I did find it interesting when you said that then, because I think a lot of people naturally go to, okay, year 5 curriculum and we'll stretch where possible. But you've kind of, I like the way that you've kind of just set the barrier there. It's like, cool, you can all access year 6 and we can help you out if not. That's really interesting.
I suppose if you've got the year 5-6, like you have to be hitting those year 6 objectives for your year 6s, don't you? So I can understand why you'd start there.
Yeah, and I think it's just about, again, not putting that glass ceiling on the children, because actually, like, year 5 and 6 does encompass the same things. Ultimately, the difference in year 6 is you're covering a bit more in the curriculum, aren't you? You're accessing new things. And I do, in some of those lessons, if I think it's going to be a bit too tricky for them, I might have a separate activity should they need it, but I would never expect them to do that. Sure. And I think it depends on, especially in a mixed class, what TAs you have as well. So I've had a TA this year, and she works in the morning, so it means that in the afternoon, anything that we do, I mean, people do tend to do it less in the afternoon anyway, don't they? But I haven't got anyone else to help me. It is just me, so I can't separate the class, I can't split them up, so we have to do it as one. And actually I always think, well, why would I tell a child you can only achieve this when they might be able to achieve this? And I think that's always been my way to do it, is to expect the maximum from them, but always have the facility to scaffold them to get there if they need it.
No, I love that approach, and I think that's really powerful. And like you said, only when I really delved into this a bit more in my own head, knowing you were coming on, Emily, did I think that the curriculum does actually lend itself to that kind of grouping. I know as maths leads in our school, we very much talk about the we're in a junior school, so 3 to 6. We very much talk about the curriculum as almost 2 chunks. The 3-4 chunk and the 5-6 chunk.
Yeah.
And the biggest jump, in my opinion, in the curriculum is going from 4 to 5.
Yeah.
Because I think there's a lot of coupling up from 3 to 4 where maybe you add a digit, or you know, for example, fractions in 3 and 4 are only same denominator. You only ever go into different denominators for some equivalent fraction changing. Nothing too tricky there. Whereas in 5 and 6, it's still the same kind of objectives. You just stretch them a bit at the top. So
that's true.
It does lend itself to that idea of 5 and 6. And I wonder if those year 5 children actually benefit from having that kind of upper expectation that you said.
I've had a bit of a realization actually whilst talking to you, because I was thinking about my classes. I don't think I've ever taught a class where I could say every single child in that class was in the range of ability within 1 year, if that makes sense. Like, I don't think I've never had a class, let's say a year 6 class, where the most able child in a particular subject and the least able child in that subject are within 1 year. There's always usually multiple years anyway. So the idea of having a year 5-6 class to me has just made me realize that it's still going to be probably the same kind of range that you'd get anyway, because you're going to have more able children in the year 5 class and less able children in the year 6. And it's just more of them now, or not necessarily more of them, because you would obviously condense to one class, but I can see how that's actually not as scary maybe as I thought it was before we started this conversation.
Yeah, I've genuinely not really found it any different. And actually, I think if you're saying, like, I've, had some children who've come up and they're maybe less confident or maybe a bit nervous about being with year 6 in the class. And actually, they've really flourished, because I haven't said to them, oh, well, you need to stay and do year 4 work. Actually, still, they've been allowed to access the same as their peers. And actually, their progress has been brilliant, to the point where just when we did the SATs the week before SATs, I said, let's all do a year 6 arithmetic paper and see how we do. And actually, they were like, I'm already getting half the marks on this. And I was like, yeah, of course you are, because you've done most of the content on this. We've just, they need reminding that actually it's all of their key stage that leads to year 6. And it was a point for them to see that arithmetic they've done in year 3, they've done in year 4, they've done it in year 5. Year 6 isn't scary. You've done most of the work already. And I think that was a really nice moment for them as well.
Here is something that baffles me, and you can help me with this one. Firstly, it's important. Is your school a 1 form entry? Is that why you've got year 5 or half form entry maybe? Is it quite a small school?
1 form in key stage 1 and then 2 classes in key stage 2.
Yeah.
Okay.
So year 3-4, are they together year 3-4 as well?
Year 3-4 and a couple of 5s, because I've already got a class of 33, so some of the 5s.
Right.
Oh wow. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm with you. So do you have to have different planning in like a 2-year cycle? Because your year 5s that are in the year 5-6 class, do they then just stay in the same class next year, and now they're the year 6s in the year 5-6 class? How does that work with planning?
I mean, I won't have to have that problem, because I'm not going to be there next year.
Oh.
I don't know.
I don't know. It's not my problem. No, I think they would do the maths and the English on a 2-year, but the topics themselves are on a 4-year cycle. So I guess the English, if you would link it, I don't tend to link my English to topic very much. I tend to sort of try and do it in the moment and do writing for purpose. But if you've got 4 cycles of English topic, then even if you're doing persuasion, theoretically, you can then change your persuasion to be about something to do with your topic. So they've done it really well in that way. It lends itself really nicely to the fact that your English is always changing. Maths is a little bit harder, isn't it? I mean, you're going to have to make sure that you've got that sort of challenge element for them there. But actually, and I mean, you guys are the maths guys here, and maybe it's different in other schools, but I tend to find that reasoning in 3, 4, 5, if they're in a separate class, doesn't tend to equate to reasoning in a reasoning paper in year 6. So I think that actually, once they hit year 6, they've done all the work for year 5, they're confident with the strategies, but now they can actually look at what year 6 reasoning means. Because otherwise, again, do we want to teach the test? No. Do we want to set them up for fail by never exposing them to the questions? No. And I think that's a really nice way of then building on that in year 6.
It's one of the hardest elements of year 6, I think, is that balance between the eternal pressure of being like, teach to the test or you have failed your job. But also, I don't want to teach to the test because it's boring and horrible. So you've got to find the balance somewhere.
And like we've said before a million times, when the best time to teach reasoning and problem solving is when you're doing that in the lesson, and it's bespoke to like what they're learning at the time. And we've spoken a lot about how it's again pragmatism versus like what you actually want to do with them. Because in my year 4 class, our reasoning and problem solving sometimes looks like year 2 and 3 reasoning and problem solving. And the reason is because they're not yet fully secure on the actual procedures on how to do the mathematical calculations, that even if we spend time unpicking word problems and reasoning, sometimes it's not relevant because they'll get to the end, realize what they've got to do, but they still can't do short multiplication properly. So it's such a fine balance. And you've alluded to it a few times in this conversation, which has been really interesting, about, you know, always hanging over our heads as teachers, no matter what, is that thought that I know at the end of year 6 they're going to do a SATs paper. And I just wonder how different our practice would be if that wasn't there.
I mean, I think my view is a little bit more controversial about the SATs in the sense that I don't actually think the tests should be got rid of themselves. I think they are a really good baseline. And I think especially as a year 6 teacher, you do sometimes see data inflating as it goes through the school. Is it a nice way to put it?
It's not controversial. It's completely true. And it's so important for it to not be. And it's like my driving aim as lower school to not do this to my upper school colleagues, because what's the point?
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why, you know, I think SATs do have a purpose. I think they're a really good baseline. My issue is the publication of the league tables and the results nationally. And I think that's what most people would say, because
completely.
I genuinely have never had children upset in SATs week, feeling the pressure. Like, they'll feel the odd anxiety. It's a test, some people do, but they all come out very chilled. We make it a very relaxed experience for them. I think my class, I would say, were blasé about it this year, which I don't know if I'd gone too far the other way, but
No.
they were really relaxed. And we got to the end of the week and they're like, oh, it's done now, like that's it. And I think if that's the atmosphere we create for them, where they haven't got the pressure of those results, which ultimately is coming from school, isn't it?
Yes,
about wanting to get those results. If they're not published nationally and we're not compared against each other and we take that cohort for what it is, the SATs themselves aren't a problem. And I think I try and put that into my teaching and not teach them to the test too much, but just naturally incorporate it into the classroom so that they don't seem like a scary thing. A reasoning paper is going to be terrifying if you've never seen those reasoning questions. So by just putting it into your teaching, you're not teaching to the test, you're just
exposing
accessing different problems, you know. That's the way I try to always see it myself.
I must say, I'm going to say right now, I completely agree with you. I don't think that I'm inherently against testing. And I know Hayden had a very similar opinion as to what you've just said when our year 6s came out this week, because there was obviously a big furore online and it almost took a couple of days for that to build up and snowball. And the reason why I found it interesting is, I did think that the reading, and Hayden has his opinion on the reading paper, was actually, I still do think it was trickier than normal in parts, but I don't think that it's because it was a test that it was bad. I think that it was, maybe someone said in the news, oh yeah, my son had done 16 SATs practice papers and none of them were as hard as this. And I was like, well, there's your first problem. Like, stop halfway through that sentence. Like, there you go. You just kind of answered your own question.
Yeah.
There's not even 16 SAT papers for him to do about it.
I know, I thought the same thing. And it was literally 16. And I was like, what's this fella, like, it's just some dad, like, putting this pressure on his kid for a SATs test that realistically, you know, it's going to have implications later on in terms of maybe secondaries use it for their predicted grades and stuff. But like,
really anymore.
No, this is the thing. I was talking to a secondary teacher and they almost kind of went, oh, really? Did they still do that? And it's just... I think this is going to lead really nicely on, Hayden, to the last bulk of this episode, which is transition. So we'll take a very quick break.
So, Emily, we want to move on now and talk a little bit about the second topic of this episode, which is all to do with transition. Now, as a year 6 teacher myself, I'm super invested in this part of the conversation because, as far as I'm aware, you have some extra role in transition, or have had some extra role in transition before. Is that right? Maybe you could tell us a bit more about that.
Yeah, I actually worked at a secondary school as a transition teacher for a year. So prior to that, I was working at a school that was in a trust. And as part of that, I asked to go and observe secondary colleagues about how they teach, because I just thought it would help my own practice. From that, I became part of a working group at a local secondary about how we can make transition better. And from being part of that, I then had our trust's secondary school ask if they can come and observe me. I think they were observing different colleagues in different schools. And anyway, they came in, they watched me, and I ended up going to work as a transition teacher at that secondary school, helping year 6 go into year 7 and beyond, obviously through the whole year. But it was a really interesting role.
That is awesome, because I can imagine again, as a year 6 teacher, that there is a ridiculously huge difference between year 6 and year 7. I just get that feeling and opinion from like parents I spoke to or children that I've seen, you know, after year 6 that come back and say hello. And even just teachers that are like, oh, what, you do that in year 6? Oh, we do that in year 7 as well. And I've developed this opinion that year 7 is basically like a repeat of year 6 and it's just the same thing. But I don't know how much of that is just based on nothing and how much of that is true. So you've been there. What is it like?
I mean, I didn't want to teach maths when I was in secondary because I was like, I can't do it. It's secondary maths. It was the same pretty much. They do sort of a base year. They do extend them. There is some new learning. Of course there is. It's year 7. But actually it is a lot of them getting to grips with the basics that they have done in year 6. I think the biggest difference is the routines of the day. So the teaching in front of the children is very similar. It's the actual routines of going between classrooms, having to have their own equipment, having to have their own books. That's the biggest change for them. I found the actual being in front of the class teaching very, very similar. It was sort of, when I came back into year 6, it was having a knowledge of how it was different for them that I could then put into my own classroom. So I probably am a little bit stricter maybe than other people who are in primary, but I think it just gets them ready for that expectation that they're going to have in secondary school. I think it's seeing them as year 6.5. That's how I like to think of it, that they need to start their transition from September, not from July. And that's where transition fails a lot of children, I think, is that spoon feed's not the right word. I think that's not quite right, but we give them so much in primary, and actually we need to make them as independent as possible during year 6 so that they can then stand on their 2 feet when they get into year 7.
I'm an avid believer of that as well, about that independence, and I agree. September, even earlier. It doesn't need to be this thing where it's like, oh, it's July now, so now we have to do the transition stuff, and it almost becomes like a token thing. That's what we do now. We do transition stuff. It absolutely needs to be that we're preparing these children throughout primary school, and obviously more weighted towards the end of primary school, to go to secondary school, which is a different experience. So when you were in that role, obviously you would have done a few different things like you've talked about. You didn't really want to teach maths at first, but you ended up teaching it. It was fine. What is there one area that you feel like maybe you had the most impact, or at least that you identified perhaps that might have the most impact on easing that process of transition?
I think the part of the transition that I noticed the most impact on from being in that role was actually building this sort of pastoral relationship. So I only worked in year 7. I didn't work across year 8 either. It was sort of just year 7 I worked with, and it was really nice to sort of be that face that they see in front of their classroom, not just as a tutor, but as a teacher that's always down that corridor, always around where they need it to be, because that's the hardest part of transition I found for the children, is going from having that sole person you see day in, day out, and talk to you about everything. You complain to them about silly things that actually you think, why are you telling me this again? But they feel they need to get it out, don't they? And actually they don't really have that person at secondary, because you see them for 10 minutes in the morning, 10 minutes in the afternoon. That's not enough to resolve a problem or feel you can tell them about it. But by being that sort of face in the corridor that they knew was there to sort of listen or take on these problems, I felt like that was the most impact for them. Is head of year sounds so serious, they almost associate it with someone to go to if they're in trouble, and I think by being a separate face to that, I think that gave them a lot. I think that was probably the most impactful part of the role.
You mentioned that it maybe made you a little bit more strict when you came back to year 6. Do you feel like there are any other practices maybe that you'd even recommend, like that you were like, oh man, we absolutely need to be doing this now that you've seen year 7, we need to be doing this more in year 6, or any advice really?
I think I noticed a lot more, like it wasn't so much the knowledge that they needed to have when they got to year 7, but it was the skills. So something like reading a map, like, we're also pushed for time when we look at our foundation subject curriculum. I think that if they need to be able to read a map when they get there in year 7, and I knew that, but I think seeing it in practice, I realized actually that can fail them sometimes. I remember the science teacher coming up to me being like, oh my gosh, do none of these children know how to draw a graph? And we know that we've taught them that, but actually to use it in a science lesson independently as the main part of their lesson, those kids were blown away, because they've never really been asked to do that, just to sit down and first task, here's some data, draw a graph. It's always quite heavily guided in a maths lesson or, within that science lesson. So I think I was quite taken aback about how key those skills are. You know, timelines in history, again, we do them in primary, but they're so important. And I think I realized that the knowledge we're teaching them is great, they need it, but we really need to underpin those skills.
As a junior school teacher, so we get our children in year 3, and all of ours tend to come from the same infant school, with some from other areas. It's quite easy for us sometimes to fall into the trap of kind of passing blame down the chain and being like, oh, well, why haven't they? How can they not do their date and, you know, underline things quickly? Now that you kind of stepped into a secondary school, did you find that they had almost a similar view of primary school teachers, where they maybe thought, how are these kids coming to year 7 and they can't even do this or that? Did you find that was a fair judgment, or did you think maybe sometimes they stretched it? Like, did you notice that?
I did notice it. The first one was when someone said, oh, this boy can't even underline with a ruler. And I was like, well, he can. I think you're probably not holding him to high enough expectations. And I think it was just because the children know that these teachers know nothing about them. So you can go there and just write a minimal amount, and that teacher is never going to know that that's what you've done. And I think it's almost that communication and that trust between the establishments that causes that problem. So I mean, coming back into primary, so one way I've tried to fix that is I create a transition pack that I send up with all the children. They write a letter to the school, which I make sure is their best kind of writing. And then that way they've had an example of the writing from the child. I get them to do a self-portrait, because again, it shows writing isn't the only thing that they need to worry about. You know, art, it shows those creative children, those artistic children who can be pushed in that. And then I do like a little person outline which says what they like, what they don't like, what they think they're good at, and that snapshot goes up with them as well. And I think by the children knowing that the secondary school have had that, they know what their writing is like. Even better is some secondaries I've heard of put a piece of year 6 writing in the front of their year 7 book. Ready, that year 6
genius.
Yeah, well, it's already there. The year 6 knows that expectation is already there, and it does stop that standard slipping. I think it's something like 40, there's a 40% gap between primary and secondary that it drops over the summer. So to get rid of that gap, show them that you already know what they can do. Have that expectation of them straight away. It's the expectation that is the problem, not the level of the work.
I am an absolute convert already to that. I can't. It's one of those things where I'm like, how have I not thought of that before? How have I not thought have this thought train? It's so true.
Yeah, without going into secondary, I never would have, you know, even seen it or thought of it. But straight away, I was like, actually, why am I not sending a piece of work? It's so simple.
Yeah, because like if I think right now, with just children in my class currently or in previous years, there are so many children that I have to hold accountable all the time, because if I don't, they will honestly just do the bare minimum. They just will. It's just, I get it. We're people. We all do it. And I'm like, yeah, of course they're going to do that when they go to secondary school, and they're like, hang on a minute, none of these people know who I am. Yeah. Back to doing minimal I go, and then the teachers will just say, oh, you just read rubbish year 6. So true. I'm absolutely going to do that now with the work. Send it up.
Yeah, well, I've got some resources for it, so I can send them over. But
hey,
I think as well, it's the fact that we're really lucky in primary to have a TA in a class at some point in the day. You know, sometimes you have a TA all day, half a day, whatever. But these children do have an extra adult to help them on hand a lot of the time. And in secondary, TAs don't work like that. And actually, they're spread so much thinner that, again, I think they say, oh, well, this child can't do anything. Well, that's probably because he's never sat and done writing on his own, or never had to do it without an adult being able to intervene and give him that scaffolding. Whereas you are expected to be a lot more independent in secondary. You do have to sit in an English lesson and just sort of get on with your own work more often than not. And I think, you know, that's a big factor to it as well. So another thing that I did is actually the children in my class, I made sure that at least twice a week, they worked on their own. Yes, I had resources out that would help them. I had scaffolding out that they could independently access to help them. But I made sure that they didn't have an adult constantly intervening with them, because I felt I was actually failing them by doing that, because they didn't learn how to problem solve or you know, come up with their own independent work. And I think that's a huge part of my practice that changed.
I think there's a really clear message coming out of this. And if I was to try and summarize, and do correct me if I'm wrong, there's kind of 2 levels to this. What I'm getting from this anyway, as a year 6 teacher, that I'm taking as advice, which is, 1, we need to be setting up our children to succeed in their transition to secondary school across the year, passively through our lessons by developing their independence. It's not a July thing. And the second thing is that we have to remember that children aren't going to be held accountable by us anymore. when they're at secondary school. And we do have a part to play in ensuring that we minimize that as much as possible. I don't think it's fair to be like, oh, not my problem anymore. Year 6 is done. See ya. I think we need to be a little bit more like, yeah, okay, I'm not going to be teaching them next year, but I'm still a massive part of their academic journey. So I really like the idea. I think I will take you up on stealing those resources and actually use them, because I think that's a fantastic idea, holding that accountability and also developing a bit of independence as well.
Absolutely. And I can't recommend enough that if you are a year 6 teacher, go and visit your feeder school. Like early on in the year, sort of September, October, see how they do things. And also you can see the kids that you had in year 6 and you can sort of be like, oh, that's not the writing that you did when you were here last year. You build that relationship. I think there needs to be such a closer relationship. And some schools do it incredibly well, but I think there's still almost that distrust between primary and secondaries, because there is that gap between them. Secondaries have to deal with so many feeder primary schools, whereas we just have that one cohort we look after. And actually, it's about building those relationships so the children know that those secondary teachers can go back and be like, can you give me a piece of their work from last year? I want to see it, and have more accountability, not just for the teachers, but for the children also.
Amazing. And as a year 4 teacher, I just sat there and listened as I promised. So I won't get involved there. Transition from year 4 to 5 is really important, guys. We really need to think about that as well. But what we'll do very quickly then, just to kind of wrap it up there. That's fascinating, Emily. Thank you so much for both letting us know your expertise about reading and transition as well. But one last thing I wanted to ask you about very, very quickly. Seen on your Twitter, we'll link that in the description as well if anyone wants to go and find you. But I'm sure they're already following you, Emily. I'm sure they're already there. But I love this thing you set up, this simple hashtag, Teacher Self-Care Sunday. What has been your favourite Sunday so far that you've posted online where you've just relaxed and enjoyed yourself?
Oh my gosh. Now you've asked me, they've gone completely blank.
In general, what's your go-to if you had to design your own self-care Sunday now where you're in your happy place, what would you be doing?
Oh, well, easy. I'd get up and I'd go for brunch. Brunch is the best meal of the day. If you don't agree, you're wrong. I would then hope that it was sunny outside, and then I would sit in the garden with a Fanta lemon and
lemon,
the perfect drink. And I would read for a while, and then I'd always finish it off with a bath, probably in the evening, just to completely relax. Maybe wash my hair if I'm feeling a little bit extra.
Hayden, do you do that often?
Yeah, wash my hair, have a bath. Yeah, record a podcast. I can imagine.
That's the ideal. I think it's about taking the time to do what you like, and for me, it is all about food and reading.
Oh, I'm with you on food, reading. I'll get there. I'm working on it.
Right, Emily, you've been absolutely amazing. But before we go, this is arguably my favourite part of the podcast. It's asking our guests to provide us with some sort of story from the classroom. So, Emily, do you have any stories to share with us today that may be embarrassing, maybe heartwarming, I don't know, maybe just a bit funny?
I'll go for embarrassing for me.
I just love it when they choose that. Come on.
I've got 2, so I'll give you the first one. They're both to do with me being clumsy. I am one of the most clumsy people in the world. A colleague came in to visit. She was going on maternity leave, so she'd come in, brought her new baby in with her, and was just coming to visit our class. And at some point, I tripped over my own foot. Luckily, I'd just given the baby back to her. I tripped over my own foot, landed on the flip chart board, hit my head on the touchscreen TV on the way down, and just collapsed in a pile with the flip chart board.
Oh no!
In front of my whole class, with the other teacher there as well, and just went silent. And then I sort of popped up, like you do, because you have to be okay. I popped up, and one of the girls really kindly put her hand up and went, "Oh, did you know that you're bleeding?" And I'd cut my head.
No.
And my whole class just sort of looked silently until I started laughing. And then they all laughed at me, and it was still mentioned 2 years later. Children that weren't even in that class were telling me about the time I tripped over my own foot, and I was like, "Yeah, I was there actually."
Yeah, still got the
Pointed
scar.
To your scar, yeah. Yeah, I did actually.
And then, on a similar vein, I was in the school hall, and a boy had been bought a skateboard for his birthday. You can probably guess where this is going.
Yep.
And I was like, I don't even think skateboarding is that hard. I bet I could do it. Got on the skateboard. I couldn't do it. I came in the next day and I was like, yeah, I can't really feel my arm. It's gone a bit funny. And my head was like, you need to go to hospital. Like, what have you done? And it turns out that I hadn't dislocated my whole shoulder, but something in my shoulder had become dislocated. And I had to wear my arm in a sling for 3 days.
Can I just ask, were you skateboarding on the skateboard with your feet? Or were you handstanding? Like, what happened to get your arm out of place?
I was on my feet, but I was so awful at it that I completely like head backwards onto the school hall and just fallen into my shoulder. But yeah, needless to say, I have not skateboarded since, and I don't think I ever want to.
I love how the theme on both of these stories is you were bleeding and had a socket out. And you were none the wiser until someone had to say, "Oh, by the way, your arm is falling off yours." Also, are you
I feel like you're one of those people that would lend themselves to having like a camera crew following you all the time. if you're this clumsy often, as you say, then I feel like that could be some good entertainment. What do you reckon?
Oh, I honestly am the worst. I went to like Bristol Zoo, and they've got a ramp. I think it's Bristol Zoo, and they've got like a ramp down into the penguins. Just completely slipped down it in front of the public. Just slipped down.
If you didn't make penguin noises as you were going down, then I don't know, you missed the trick there.
I was in so much shock. I just like slid down this ramp. I got stuck at the top of the Legoland dragon ride with my class. The roller coaster just stopped, and my class looked at me and they were like, "You have done this to us. This is you."
As if you've got control. And at that point, you turned around and went, "And this is why you have to work hard in secondary school." And ever since then,
the power we have.
After that, no one would go on the rides with me because we broke down on a water ride as well, right at the top.
Oh,
this
my
was
goodness.
my first problem. This was like my second, and they were all like, "We don't want to go on with you anymore because we're just going to have to climb down those ladders." The ladders, everyone says, why do they have ladders on a roller coaster? So you can climb down. We've done it. We've had to do it.
You had to climb down the ladders.
Yeah, we couldn't get down. We were stuck at the top. We had to climb down the ladders. That was not in my risk assessment, I can tell you.
No,
Oh my goodness. I'm kind of now, this is like a new kind of perspective on this whole interview because I'm looking at that bookshelf behind you. I'm quite worried something's going to happen.
Yeah,
Like,
don't
is
climb
ominous.
it. Don't skateboard around it. Just maybe don't be near it.
No, I haven't got any skateboards to hand at the minute, actually, so it should be okay.
It's just been sat on one this whole interview. Like, what are you doing?
Yeah, so that was dangerous enough.
Well, listen, Emily, we have loved this chat. I know I can speak for Dylan here because I personally I feel like I've learned loads from you. So thank you for sharing your wisdom with myself and all of the listeners and viewers. It has been absolutely incredible. And also thank you for leaving us with such a good laugh at the end of this episode. I feel like we got loads of stories, not just the one. And it's been an absolute pleasure.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me on.
Hayden, I'd love to sit and dissect this, but I think the viewers, they have to go to work because it's been all night. This podcast. Really
Yeah,
long.
anyone listens to this on their travels, sorry for making you 2 hours.
It's okay.
late.
Yeah, because it will just sort the commute out for the whole week rather than for one day.
Which is
just
what
the
we
whole
want.
week. Just listen to this spread over time and give us a 5-star review on Apple, iTunes, whatever the hell it is. But none of us have an iPhone, so
Yeah, we don't have it, but we'd like you to. So I think we should end it there, Dylan, because it's been a very, very long episode. Thank you so much for listening.
Oh, I have actually got another story.
No, we're going to end it there. I'm the editor, so I'm just going to cut you off.
Story from the club.